is CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. At least 4 people have died after a boat carrying migrants sank in the English Channel, hours after the UK tried to reset its policy on crossings.
Our other headlines: UK inflation eases slightly, but the experts warn the cost of living crisis is only going to get worse.
New images of bags of money seized by Belgian police are released as 3 of the 4 accused appear in court in the EU Parliament corruption investigation.
Ukraine shoots down more than a dozen drones over Kyiv as Moscow continues to bombard the country's capital.
And Argentina are in the World Cup final, but will it be France or Morocco who joins them?
At least 4 people have died after a small boat carrying dozens of migrants sank in the English Channel. 43 other people were rescued, most of them from the water, in a major operation between British and French authorities. It's understood the small boat started sinking at around 3 o'clock in the morning local time in freezing conditions around 50 kilometres off Dover.
The number of people arriving in Britain after crossing the English Channel has more than doubled in the last 2 years. A record of nearly 45,000 people arrived in small boats from France this year alone. Data compiled by the Missing Migrants Project shows since 2014 more than 200 migrants have been recorded dead or missing in the Channel.
Our correspondent Andrew Wilson has been following the story for us. I mean, this is absolutely heartbreaking, isn't it? And it's rare to happen in December.
It was rare to happen in December. I mean, 5 years ago, you'd have a clutch of boats making it across in the middle of the summer, and that would be it. The whole thing would die away in the autumn and then wait till spring again before the traffic started, when you had numbers in their hundreds crossing the channels. Now we've got numbers in their thousands crossing the channels. And if proof were needed, it's an uptick in the middle of, pretty much the middle of December. You've got people trying to cross the channel, which would be outrageous even 2 years ago to consider. But now it's happening. The people smugglers are putting people into inflatable boats and sending them across the channel in freezing conditions, persuading them they got good chance of making it to the other side. Now, this call was a classic case in point. It's about 30 kilometres off the coast of the UK, which is pretty much the middle of the channel. The call went in fairly swiftly that this boat was in trouble, and a huge operation was mobilised almost straight away, involving UK Coast Guard, French Navy, the Army were involved, presumably with spotting and intelligence gathering, air ambulance, fishing vessels nearby rerouted to come to the scene as well, and of course on the ground ambulance crews and so on deployed for the survivors brought in. 43 people saved, 4 fatalities confirmed. At least 30 of those people were taken from the water. When these rubber boats fail, they fail quickly and people are plunged into these icy conditions. If proof were needed that this is a problem that is slowly getting out of control, then of course this will be it. It signals exactly what the Prime Minister was trying to highlight yesterday in the Houses of Parliament when he said he wants to revise and boost the operation to prevent these journeys taking place. Then this happens, it really will focus minds.
Well, as you say, Andrew, this happened just hours after the UK's Prime Minister announced his new plan to tackle the migrant crisis in the Channel.
Well, as we discussed yesterday, we had a Prime Minister who's looking to define himself. There's the strikes going on at the moment, and of course there's the migrant problem going on at the moment. This appears to have been chosen by going from yesterday's announcement that Rishi Sunak wants to prioritise the migrant crisis, and they've said it in so many words. This is now a huge priority for us. It appeals to all their constituencies and all the rest of it. Thus far, what the Prime Minister is saying is he wants to fix it by throwing more money at the problem, by rearranging the coordinated operations on the UK side, linking Ministry of Defence with the Coast Guard, with the Navy, to all work together on deploying, on intelligence gathering and on operations and enforcement, to do all that together. So that's a step in a certain direction. But of course, what's really at the heart of this is discouraging people from coming. And even the Home Secretary today made a statement in the Houses of Parliament to add her weight to the government's determination to do something about this.
Mr. Speaker, these are the days that we dread. Crossing the Channel in unseaworthy vessels is a dangerous endeavour. It is for this reason, above all, that we are working so hard to destroy the business model of the people smugglers, evil, organised criminals who treat human beings as cargo. This morning's tragedy, like the loss of 27 people on 1 November day last year, is the most sobering reminder possible of why we have to end these crossings.
Now, the kind of language that the Home Secretary is using is getting more and more military as things progress. She's talking about intelligence gathering, interception, coordination and enforcement. So they're impressing, or trying to impress the electorate with a determination of sorts in their language. But the real problem will be, as I said, discouraging these people from coming. Now, part of that is working with particularly the Albanians. 35% of these migrants are thought to come from Albania, so we can expect Home Office officers to be deployed to Tirana at the airport there to try and play their part in preventing some people making the journey in the first place. But the real issue will be in legislation. That's what the Home Secretary hinted at today. They're going to toughen up the legislation in the new year in terms of what happens to people trying to seek asylum. And Suella Braverman there in the speech she gave mentioned people who apply late or with what she called spurious claims will be removed from the list with no right of appeal. That means they're going to clamp down on people's asylum claims and start getting tougher. They feel that appeals to their electorate, but also they feel that will somehow tighten the numbers. Whether or not that will work and whether or not the human rights argument on the other side will be deployed to prevent that from becoming the tough legislation the government wants in the new year remains to be seen.
Andrew, thank you very much. Our correspondent, Andrew Wilson.
Rising prices in the UK have slowed slightly, but the analysts say it's just too early to tell whether or not inflation has peaked. Annual inflation eased to 10.7% in November, lower than predicted and compared to 11.1% in October. Despite that improvement, it's still more than 5 times the UK government's inflation target.
Well, the main driver behind the drop in inflation last month was falling fuel prices. But 2 big categories are offsetting the fall: food and hospitality.
When it comes to food, people are paying more than ever. November was the 16th straight month of food price rises. Annual food inflation is now at a 45-year high of 16.5%. According to one survey, an average weekly shop for one person, including products like eggs, milk and fruit, now costs around $58. That's around $11 higher than in February. Well, one item many families will want to put in their shopping baskets over the next week is turkey. But UK farmers are dealing with the biggest ever avian flu outbreak, and that's led to a shortage of supplies. And those that are available could be 30% more expensive than last year. Our correspondent Laura Macon-Isherwood reports.
At Copus Turkey Farm in southeast England, the build-up to Christmas has been tense. Every day brings yet more risk that the business could be obliterated as a devastating strain of bird flu sweeps the United Kingdom.
To describe it, it's probably the COVID of the poultry world. It could be anywhere, and if you get it on a farm, it decimates your flock. We would literally have nothing for Christmas, and probably it would mean that in future years we wouldn't be able to produce. And 98% of our turnover is based in December. So we really are trying everything we can to protect our business for future generations to come.
Like poultry farms across the UK, birds that would normally roam free have been ordered indoors. Farm bosses are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on protective netting, extra staff and extra processing equipment in a bid to keep this flock flu-free. Biosecurity guidance has also been issued by the government as concerns about supply levels continue to grow.
Farms across the UK are now taking a number of measures to try to keep avian flu out of their flocks, from asking people to dip their boots in disinfectant before walking in, and even sometimes asking people to avoid this land altogether.
But with the virus also transferred by free-roaming wild animals, without a vaccine, complete immunity is impossible. The British Poultry Council estimates around 50% of the free-range turkeys produced for Christmas have been lost so far this year, around 600,000 birds. Industry experts have warned supply shortages may be imminent, and according to the latest market research, the price of those fresh turkeys still available have already gone up by as much as 30%. With many in the poultry industry reliant on these sales to stay in business, Verity Kopas hopes consumers aren't put off by the costs.
We keep saying it's going to get better. Each year it's going to get better, and for the last few years it has felt very tough for many families. But I think that celebration and that one time to come together is a lovely time, and hopefully a time that people will want to spend that extra little bit on their family.
After COVID-19 led to pared down festive plans in the last few years, both farmers and families are hoping this latest virus doesn't sabotage this year's Christmas menu. Laura Macon-Isherwood, CGTN, Southern England.
Well, let's talk to international economist Vicky Price. Great to have you back on the programme, Vicky. So UK inflation rising, but less fast than it was. What do today's figures mean?
I think it's good news. It means that perhaps we're not going to see the type of inflation which had been forecast just a few months ago, when, of course, there wasn't support from the government to keep electricity prices down. Now there is, even though those prices have gone up. Whether we like it or not, we've seen this spike happening in October and then a freeze. This is why the October data was so high. We had over 11% inflation in the UK. But when you look at the November data, then it inevitably comes down because we haven't had another increase in electricity prices that people are paying at the household level. Of course, a lot depends on energy for the future. That's good news that energy prices overall internationally are going down, and petrol at the pumps has been going down as well. It's been so obvious to anyone travelling around the UK, assuming they can travel, because we've had some very bad weather in the last day or so. So it's good news overall that we're seeing this reduction happening, but there are aspects of the overall picture which are worrying, such as the food prices. You've been talking about turkeys there, but food price inflation continues to rise, even though it's not rising quite at the rate it was rising a little while ago. So we've still got an issue there in terms of how long that upward trend may still be there, and whether indeed this is the end of the increases that we have seen over the last few months.
So let's talk a bit more about those food prices then. What does this kind of inflation do to people? How do people cope with these rising food costs, among other things?
I think this is a problem not just in the UK, but also internationally, because, of course, energy and food prices matter a lot for anyone who is at the lower end, if you like, of the income scale, because a larger percentage of their pay or whatever it is that they get from the state goes into essentials, and those essentials are energy, keeping yourself warm, and food. So it hits people particularly who depend a lot on those items, and the issue for them is, of course, what alternative is there? What we've seen in the UK, which is really quite interesting, is that discount supermarkets, or those that certainly don't charge as much as perhaps some of the bigger supermarkets, the big German ones like Aldi and Lidl, have done very well because they have been attracting customers by keeping the prices quite low. So you see a lot of competition taking place, but overall it suggests that the prices that most people pay, the retail price index, if you like, which is rising faster than just the CPI, the consumer price index, is affecting people, particularly in the middle and lower income bracket, and that's a serious problem for the future. Where will they find the money for Christmas, for example? Where will they find the money for next year as well? And that's why the economy is slowing down, because we're seeing a very substantial drop in real disposable incomes taking place this year and likely to continue next year.
So the figures out today might suggest that inflation in the UK has peaked. Is it too early to say that?
No, I think it is peaking in other countries as well. So I'm suggesting, therefore, that if you just look at those prices, the international environment has changed in such a way that maybe we're seeing a plateauing taking place. One small thing about the UK, which is that there is another increase which is expected in energy bills for households coming in April. We might see another little spike. But overall, I think if you start comparing where we are now with a year ago, as some of the earlier costs of the invasion into Ukraine by Russia, stop having the impact that they had originally in terms of encouraging prices to go up very significantly for a while. Once that disappears, we can see inflation, in fact, dropping quite quickly.
Vicky Price, great to get your thoughts today. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, well, US inflation cools as the Federal Reserve mulls its response. We'll take you to New York next.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. And just a reminder that CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
US markets have been buoyed by signs that inflation could have peaked. CPI data shows it's continuing to slow with the fifth month-on-month fall in a row. And that may have an effect on the Federal Reserve's next interest rate decision. Let's talk to our correspondent John Terrett at the New York Stock Exchange. John, that CPI figure has really resonated there, hasn't it?
Yeah, you know, it really did, Jamie and Robin. It really, really did. You know, the Dow was up 700 points briefly yesterday morning, just after the figure came out. And although it couldn't hang on to that elevated level, it did close in the green around 100 points to the good. And the reason is basically very simple. This was the smallest price increase that we have seen in just about a year here in America. So really something to cheer about. And I know, to answer your question of earlier, I know that Wall Street certainly thinks that inflation has peaked. That's what they think here. But there are some things that are not very good still, including food prices, which are still massively elevated. They are 12% higher than they were this time last year, which means for every $100 you spend, you have to add $12 to it this year that you didn't last year. Now, I know that's not really very much if you have a good job or if you have two incomes in your family, but a lot of people don't have that, and for them it really is a big issue. That's serious price inflation there. Now, petrol, or gas as they call it here, that's certainly a lot lower. I just checked now, and the spot price for WTI West Texas Intermediate, which is our benchmark crude oil here out of Texas, is $77 a barrel. Now, I mean, it wasn't it 120 earlier this year at some point? So you could see that's come down massively. However, heating oil, and a lot of people use heating oil in this country, have it delivered on a monthly or a 3-monthly basis. Heating oil is up by about 25% over last year, and natural gas is ahead by about 31%. So that's really quite a lot. And I have some other figures for you. Airline tickets are up about 1/3 on last year. We've got United talking about their business travel flattening out, and JetBlue saying that they're a bit disappointed with their holiday travel figures for December. They were expecting more. Delta, on the other hand, seems to be promoting growth, but they have a different kind of clientele over at Delta. Used vehicles, which Americans call lovingly pre-owned. The prices are coming down there, but the new cars are still pretty elevated. They are coming down in cost, but you still have to pay now $45,000 to $49,000 for a pretty basic new car. That's a lot. I remember when I came to America 20 years ago, we got a new one for around $20,000. So that's doubling in 20 years. And the Dow and the Nasdaq and the S&P very unusually ahead of an interest rate decision. Well, actually, that's wrong. That's not right. Often immediately ahead of an interest rate decision, the markets do go up. But I think given all the uncertainty, it is a little bit unusual that they're up quite so much after a very strong day yesterday. We have the Dow up 200 points now, Nasdaq 54, and S&P 500 And the interest rate decision comes in a couple of hours from now.
Well, no pressure or anything then. What will the Fed do?
Well, the thing is, you have to remember, despite everything I've just said, inflation is still elevated. It's still 7%. And for a lot of Americans, that is still an awful lot. Now, I remember, I'm old enough to remember, when inflation here was like 18%. And when I was in the UK, it was above 20%. So it's nothing like that, nothing at all. But the trouble is, people have not been used to inflation for the best part of the last 30 years. It's only been bumping around 2%. So it is a lot for an awful lot of people. President Biden says that things are getting better. And he's right in the sense that shipping issues are now being sorted out, commodity prices are stabilizing, the dollar is stabilizing. But the two real big problems are that rent is still going up here, and that's greedy landlords, basically. And jobs, of course, are still red hot. Employers, you know, they can't hire people. People don't want to do the jobs, or the employers find that they can't pay the money that the employees, potential employees, want. So it's a very extraordinary situation in the labour market. So I think what's going to happen, to answer your question, is that rates will continue to go up here, but they will go up more slowly. Wall Street is betting on 50 basis points in 2 hours' time at 19 hours GMT, and that will be the 7th increase this year. Of course, the Fed is aiming for 2%, not 7%. And that's not going to happen probably until at least 2024. Wall Street would like to see the Federal Reserve pause completely and not raise interest rates, give it a couple of months and then come back to it if necessary. But I don't think that's going to happen.
John, good to see you. Thanks for that. Our correspondent John Terrett in New York.
US lawmakers have proposed bipartisan legislation to ban TikTok. It comes amid concern that the social media platform could be used to spy on American citizens. The legislation would block all transactions from any social media companies said to be under Chinese or Russian influence. TikTok, owned by China's ByteDance, is one of the most popular apps in the United States with 100 million users.
The boss of the failed crypto exchange FTX has been denied bail after being arrested in the Bahamas. Sam Bankman-Fried will be held on remand until early February after the island's chief magistrate said there was a great risk he would attempt to flee justice. Mr. Bankman-Fried faces 8 criminal charges in the United States after FTX collapsed last month, owing investors over $3 billion.
China has filed a dispute with the World Trade Organization over US export controls on semiconductor chips. Beijing says it's seeking to uphold its legitimate rights and interests. The restrictions imposed in October make it harder for Chinese firms to buy or develop advanced semiconductors.
Germany's recession next year will be milder than expected. That's according to the country's leading economic institute. The IFO says the economy will shrink by 0.1% in 2023. That's down from the previous forecast of 0.3%. The economy is also predicted to start growing again in 2024.
Elon Musk is no longer the world's richest man after sharp falls in the value of shares in his electric car company Tesla. Musk is now worth around $178 billion. He's been overtaken in the top spot by Bernard Arnault, chief executive of luxury group LVMH, who's valued at $188 billion.
Now, it's been called one of the biggest corruption scandals in European Parliament history. A member of the European Parliament suspected of taking large sums of money to lobby for Qatar has not appeared before a judge in Brussels as expected.
Eva Kaili's title as Vice President has already been revoked in an overwhelming vote by her colleagues. She's one of 4 people arrested and charged in connection with the scandal. Well, our correspondent Alex Cadier is in Brussels on this story. So, Alex, what happened at this pre-trial hearing?
Well, we told you yesterday that this story would rumble on, and true to form, it has done. Again, that shocking news, that surprising news that Eva Kaili did not appear in front of the pre-trial hearing today. We don't actually know what happened exactly inside the room. It was behind closed doors. 3 of the people charged were there, including a judge. 3 of the male people who were charged. I think that may be the core of this story. Eva Kaili was actually stuck in her prison because of prison guard strikes in Belgium. That is what Les Echos, the French newspaper, is reporting as to why Eva Kaili was not able to make it to her pre-trial hearing here at the Palace of Justice in Brussels. Now, what we know is that she has been held on remand, or they all have been held until the trial. We have no indication of when that trial will be set, but instead of Eva Kaili appearing, her partner Francesco Giorgi and former Italian Pier Antonio Panzeri appeared. Now, Panzeri and Kaili, between them, were responsible for 1.5 million euros that were seized by the Belgian authorities in the last week or so. So they were really at the heart of this investigation. So that is what happened in the pre-trial hearing. Very hard to get more information, but a real courtroom drama at a very high level here in Brussels.
So Qatar, which has been implicated in this scandal, has denied any wrongdoing, but its ties and its business relations with the EU are coming under the spotlight.
Yeah, it's important to say that both Qatar and Eva Kaili and others have deny any wrongdoing. Eva Kaili's lawyer in the last few hours saying that she had no knowledge of the money that was found at her property, and so real strong denial of any wrongdoing from her and from Qatar. It may strain some of the existing deals and agreements that the European Union had with Qatar. That's what we're seeing already. The two main bodies of legislation that parliamentarians are worried about, one is the visa-free program that Qataris were able to benefit from as part of an exchange with the European Union. Of course, natural resources coming from Qatar are becoming more and more important to the EU to face the energy crisis, so that visa-free program was one of the things on the table. But that's quite minor. There are only 300,000 Qataris, so it would not make an enormous difference to the bloc. The other program, however, is much more important, the Open Skies program, which allowed Qatar Airways, one of the largest airlines in the world and the flagship carrier of Qatar, to have free access to the same level as European airlines to all of the 450 million passengers that fly over Europe's skies every year. Now, that is being reviewed by parliamentarians. There is concern there may have been some undue influence on the way that that process was made, because in exchange the European Union just got access to Qatar's 2.3 million travellers. So it seems like there's at least an imbalance in the numbers of travellers that the airlines are benefiting from there. But parliamentarians looking at all of the relationships at this point, this is absolutely the political fallout of this scandal as legal proceedings are ongoing, a risk of those two pieces of legislation here in Brussels.
Alex, thank you very much. Our correspondent Alex Cadier in Brussels.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, when do you get more energy out than you put in? Scientists think they know. A breakthrough in nuclear fusion next.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities, reinvent, find new opportunities, discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
What do we mean when we talk about the difference? The difference is in the detail, in the background,
defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story. wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. At least 4 people have died after a boat carrying migrants sank in the English Channel, hours after the UK tried to reset its policy on crossings.
Our other headlines: UK inflation eases slightly, but the experts warn the cost of living crisis is only going to get worse.
And new images of bags of money seized by Belgian police are released as 3 of the 4 accused appear in court in the EU Parliament corruption investigation.
Ukraine says it shot down 13 Russian drones over the capital, Kyiv. President Zelensky says the Iranian-made devices were destroyed early on Wednesday before they could drop any explosive payload onto the city. Some drones did get through, leaving a number of residential buildings damaged.
Russia's foreign minister has been addressing ruling party members in Moscow. It comes as Washington is debating supplying Patriot surface-to-air missiles to Ukraine, something that Moscow would likely see as an escalation in the conflict. Well, our correspondent Stuart Smith is in Moscow. So, Stuart, what can we expect from the foreign minister?
Yeah, he was talking earlier to a whole host of delegations from the top political parties from the CIS countries. That's the set of countries of 9 countries that formed a grouping after the fall of the Soviet Union and frequently keep in touch to discuss finance, trade and common security. And at this meeting, hosted by United Russia, the ruling political party here in Moscow, the foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, said he had a vision for the way that Central Asia will develop in the future, moving away from the West, and particularly with the European Union and the United States having a strong influence in Central Asia, to one he described as independent sovereign interests in various spheres amongst the countries themselves. Now, he said that this meant they could make trade alliances and have economic partnerships to their liking, but suggested there would be pushback from the West in doing so. He said that it was time for the political and economic centre of the world to move further east, i.e. to these CIS countries and beyond. And he also suggested there, with the Western powers potentially losing their influence, then it's up to the CIS countries to work together as their own grouping to maintain their independence and maintain their political sovereignty. So a call to arms, in effect, to the delegations of various political parties earlier today in Moscow.
So if this Patriot missile delivery does go ahead, what will that mean for Russia?
Yeah, it means that Ukraine is more well defended from aeroplane and missile attacks than it was before. Now, for Russia, that is, of course, a problem, but there hasn't been the same level of reaction as there was earlier in the year when it seemed like Ukraine may get the ATACMS offensive missile system, which truly would have been a big problem for Russia. This means that Ukraine will be able to more easily shoot down the cruise missiles and ballistic missiles that the Russian armed forces send to Ukraine, including now, as Russia has made public energy infrastructure. That's a big change since October, Russia admitting that it is targeting certain civilian infrastructure. And so Dmitry Peskov formally said that they will wait until confirmation that this delivery of the new Patriot missile system is confirmed, but he made clear that he agreed with Dmitry Medvedev, the deputy chairman of the Security Council, that this would be just another target for Russian armed forces to hit. At the suggestion of any kind of Christmas or New Year's truce, Dmitry Peskov said that was not on the cards, and there's been no approach from Kiev to try to arrange such a thing.
Stuart, thank you very much. Our correspondent Stuart Smith in Moscow.
Well, Jamie Shea is a former senior NATO official. I asked him how the delivery of the Patriot missile system from the United States might change the course of this conflict.
Well, first of all, it's going to be very important for the United States and other allies to train the Ukrainians to use the Patriot system, because the Patriots have a multi-person crew and they're much more complicated to operate, requiring a lot more training than the type of systems that the Ukrainians have been receiving from the US and other allies up to now. Obviously, the Russians will say they're targets, but there's nothing new there, Jamie, because any kind of Western arms system that's sent to Ukraine is seen by the Russians to be a legitimate target, and the Russians regularly claim that they've destroyed many of these systems, although there's no way of verifying that, of course.
What do these drone strikes today tell us about Iran's involvement in the fighting in Ukraine?
Well, it shows that the Iranians are up to their neck in terms of the support they're giving to the Russians at the moment. It also shows that the Iranians are not selling simply one batch of these Shahad drones to Russia, but several. The good news in that, if it can be called good news at all, is that it does imply, if Moscow is having to go to Tehran for its weapons, that Russia is now starting to run out of its own stocks. It's starting to have production problems. The sanctions, particularly on the transfer of electronics for weapons, are working. But what I think the West would really be worried about, Jamie, is if the Iranians follow up and start supplying Russia also with short-range ballistic missiles, which could be a lot more destructive than these drones. And I believe that one of the reasons why the United States is now giving Patriot air defense systems to Ukraine, which it had not done hitherto is because the Patriots are one of the very few systems that could be effective against these Iranian short-range ballistic missiles if they start arriving in the arsenal of Russia in the days ahead.
President Putin has warned of a long war, and there are signs that Russia is making some gains, again in Donbass. Let's just consider for a moment where you might see the conflict going next, a sit rep almost.
Well, I think next spring is going to be decisive because we're going now, of course, to winter. Experts differ as to whether winter means a complete halt in military operations or not. The Ukrainians clearly have an interest in trying to keep the war going throughout the winter to prevent the Russians resupplying their forces, to prevent the Russians training their forces, and to prevent Russia building deep fortifications in the territories that it still controls, you know, First World War kind of trench systems, which of course would make it harder for the Ukrainians to advance. On the other hand, the Russians want to keep the war going because Putin, having proclaimed that he has annexed 4 provinces of Ukraine, over which he has only about 50% control at the moment, clearly he doesn't want to lose face by not being able next spring to go back on the offensive and completely conquer the territory of those 4 provinces. So I think both sides next spring will want to keep the conflict going, and it depends really next spring who is successful when big military operations resume. If it's the Ukrainians, more support from the West for the idea that they can liberate their territory. If it's the Russians who seem to have the upper hand, having used the winter to regroup, then you may get more countries in the West calling for Ukraine and Russia to work out some kind of compromise peace at the negotiating table.
Greece has been rocked by fresh protests after the death of a teenager a week after being shot by police. The 16-year-old Roma boy died of his injuries on Tuesday.
It sparked demonstrations in Athens, where at least 30 people were detained following clashes with the police. Our correspondent Evangelos Sipsas reports.
Demonstrators took to the streets in the Greek capital of Athens following the news that a 16-year-old Roma boy succumbed to his injuries after spending over a week in intensive care unit following a shooting by a police officer in Thessaloniki. The demonstrators demanded justice and chanted "Down with police brutality" before being met with heavy police presence. The protesters start gathering in the early evening hours of Tuesday with a planned march towards the Greek parliament. But by late evening, as the crowds grew, around 1,000 police officers faced protesters throwing rocks and bottles. Roadblocks were created and garbage cans set on fire. Officers used tear gas and flash bombs to try to disperse the crowds. Around 30 people were detained, with one protester suffering light injuries. Protests led by the Roma community, Greece's largest minority, have been taking place in cities across the country since the incident occurred. The 16-year-old boy was shot during a police chase after he allegedly drove away from a gas station without paying. A 34-year-old police officer is expected to appear in court in the next few days in relation to the teenager's shooting. After the death of the boy was announced, the charges have changed from attempted murder to second-degree murder and manslaughter. Meanwhile, Roma groups are calling for restraint, while anti-government protesters are calling for increased protests. Evangelos Ipsos for CGTN, Athens.
A judge in Peru has delayed a hearing on whether the former president, Pedro Castillo, can be released from detention. His supporters have gathered outside the police station where he's been held since last week. He was impeached and later arrested after attempting to dissolve parliament. Castillo's dismissal has sparked waves of protest in which 7 people have been killed.
At least 120 people have been killed in the Democratic Republic of Congo after heavy rain caused floods and landslides in the capital of Kinshasa. Entire neighborhoods were flooded and sinkholes have swallowed houses and roads. The death toll is expected to rise.
Early vote counts from Fiji's general election shows the Prime Minister Frank Bainimarama's ruling party is on course to lose power. The opposition People's Alliance Party has secured over 43% of the vote so far, with the Fiji First Party trailing on 25%. The man who looks on course to be the next Prime Minister, Sitiveni Rabuka, previously held this job in the 1990s after a series of coups.
The mayor of Istanbul has been sentenced to 3 years in prison after he was found guilty of insulting public officials on social media. Ekrem İmamoğlu is considered a strong rival to President Erdogan in Turkey's elections next June. This judgment could prevent him from standing. Thousands of his supporters have protested against the sentencing in what's been seen as a politically motivated trial. His lawyers say he'll appeal.
And Denmark will finally have a new government 6 weeks after that inconclusive election. The Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, made the announcement after leading negotiations involving all 11 parties. She'll stay on as the leader of a coalition incorporating parties on the left, the centre and centre-right.
Now, US scientists have revealed they've carried out the first ever nuclear fusion experiment that achieved a net energy gain.
They say it's a breakthrough that could revolutionise the world with clean energy. But what does it all mean? And should we be preparing to move over to this new, seemingly limitless source of power? Well, let's talk to Neil Cairns from CGTN Science and Technology show Razor. Without baffling us all, keep it simple. What is fusion and how does it work?
Well, how we get nuclear energy at the moment is we break atoms apart. With fusion, we're pushing hydrogen together to create helium. And when you do that, when you fuse hydrogen and make it into helium, you get excess energy. And excess energy is used to heat water in the long run, which will drive a turbine, which will provide the energy. There's always a turbine at the end of all these processes. So this is, it's about not smashing so much as providing the environment in which fusion can happen. And remember, fusion is what's powering the sun. Hydrogen in the sun is being turned into helium all the time, releasing all the energy that keeps us alive on Earth. And to be able to mimic that here on Earth, you have to provide special conditions. And that's one of the things which is significant about this announcement.
And you said to me before when we were talking about it, it's about containing this energy, isn't it? Why does this work out to be such a significant moment in the study of all this?
It's significant for 2 reasons. The first is that there's several different ways of creating fusion at the moment. There's Razor has done one story on the great experiment that's being built in France, ITER, which is going to be the first experimental fusion tokamak reactor, which is a giant donut, which encloses what's called a plasma, which is, this is where it gets a little bit exciting.
Still with you, carry on.
Yeah, you're still with me, good. You heat the hydrogen to such a level that it becomes a plasma. That's a gas where all the electrons and protons and neutrons are all flying around free. And you have to reach that stage before it can reach fusion conditions. We've filmed another system which uses a capsule, a tiny capsule of hydrogen fuel, and causes fusion by a high pressure collision with that. Now, what's happening at Lawrence Livermore Laboratory is they used 192 lasers fired at a tiny capsule of different hydrogen isotopes, hydrogen, deuterium and tritium, they're the different forms of hydrogen, to create this fusion. So that's significant. This is proof that their method, using lasers rather than these great containment vessels, works. But this is the first time ever that we have got the Holy Grail, where we have got more energy out than we put in. And that's what fusion's all about. Once you get fusion working one day, you'll just be able to keep pouring in the hydrogen fuel, and that reaction will sustain, creating more energy than it takes to start it. And that's where the magic is.
We seemingly spend every day reporting on the world's energy crisis, problems with either gas or oil or electricity. So hooray, the world's energy crisis has been fixed. When is this going to happen then?
It hasn't been fixed, because the sad thing is that the 50% increase in energy is only at the point where the lasers impact. It's kind of the amount of energy the lasers put into this tiny capsule, right? It's 50% more energy in at that point, and just for fractions of a second. But the amount of energy that we use to power the lasers, we still haven't got past all of that. So it's not positive yet. How long is it going to be? I don't think I will see it. There's an old joke that nuclear physicists have. Fusion is only 20 years away, and it always will be. But I think this is a small glimmer of hope that one day that joke will no longer be funny.
Neil, thank you very much for that. Even I understood most of that. Neil Cairns from CGTN's Science and Technology show, Razor.
Now, talks to halt the destruction of nature very much hang in the balance. That's the verdict from the COP15 Biodiversity Summit in Montreal. Progress in negotiations has been slow. Senior ministers are due to arrive in Canada on Thursday. Well, our correspondent Adiz Tianshan is there for us. So, Adiz, some developing nations have apparently walked out of negotiations. And where does that leave them?
Well, it all got pretty intense last night. We understand a sizable group of developing nations walked out due to an impasse over the creation of new funds that would be used for whatever the framework they may be able to reach here in Montreal. And I've asked that to the spokesperson of the UN Secretariat for the Conservation of Biological Diversity. He said that it's a pretty significant move. He's also said that this is a strategic negotiating tactic, and in order to resolve these differences, the heads of delegations have actually met just about an hour ago. So we will see whatever progress they may have, but we understand that it's not just about the amount of funding they request. It also has to do with how and when these funds may be transferred to these nations. And there's a lot of finger pointing going on. The developing nations would tell the richer nations that it's the industrialization they benefited from that caused a lot of this loss of this nature and ecosystem. So they should be paying for their conservation in the long run. But the developing nations and the richer nations would say that essentially it will take several years to create new funds for this. And given the geopolitical uncertainties, the economic uncertainties we're facing, we should really be looking at the pre-existing resources, they say. We should tap into resources that will be available immediately as soon as we agree on a framework agreement here in Montreal. And they're also concerned about having some conditions in this agreement that will really require these developing nations to be more transparent as to how exactly these funds are distributed, to make sure there's an equal democratic distribution on the ground, which has been a problem in the past, frankly. So these are some of the issues they're talking about right now, but it comes, as you mentioned, just before high-level delegations are set to arrive.
Adiz Tianshan in Montreal, thank you very much.
Well, famed for its biodiversity, Australia is home to animal and plant species not found anywhere else.
But many are under threat due to loss of habitat, including wallabies, which conservation groups say are being squeezed out by human development. Our correspondent Greg Navarro reports.
Come to this coastal suburb just north of Cairns at around 5:30 every evening as the blistering sun starts to set over the mountains, and you'll see them come out of the shade and into this field by the hundreds.
There is fencing to try and keep them out of it, but the reality is they just don't actually have anywhere else to go.
That's because houses now sit on most of the land that used to be home to one of the country's largest wallaby populations. Hundreds of wallabies searching for food have been hit by cars.
The mum was hit by a car and little baby here was dragged along the road.
Others wandering into yards have been killed by dogs. Still, hundreds of remaining wallabies fill this field each night, unfazed by people, because they were attracted to the lush green grass at the nearby playing field. Wallabies possess this ability called embryonic diapause. It essentially means that pregnant female wallabies can give birth whenever they want, wherever they want. Scientists say if you're a pregnant female wallaby, considering the abundance of grass here and lack of natural habitat, this place looks pretty good.
So we have this situation where it's not good, there's not enough land for them to live on, but they keep having babies.
Culling was considered to help reduce numbers, but ecologist Shay Agar says she had a better idea.
It was something that growing up I always wished that we could do. I would always think, well, why can't we just move them rather than put a bullet in every one of these animals' heads?
Today, community group Agile Project Wildlife Rescue is in the midst of one of the biggest macropod relocations in Australia. Nearly 800 wallabies have been humanely removed from around Cairns and released onto private lands, away from homes and cars. The group, made up of more than 160 volunteers, has also rescued more than 2,000 wallabies, including these two, just months old. Their mothers were killed by cars.
They wouldn't survive without our intervention. It's as simple as that. No, a lot of them don't when they come into care because of what's happened to mum.
Other methods are being considered to reduce wallaby numbers here, including sterilization, but the relocation effort is proving to be 95% effective.
I think so much conservation goes into endangered species, which is totally appropriate, but why do we have to continually, time and time again, wait for an animal to become endangered or threatened before we take action?
You can hardly see any of the roads once all of our wallaby deaths have been reported.
Agar says hundreds of wallabies here are still getting hit by cars, but the relocation program is ensuring this native species has a chance to survive and thrive in new habitats that haven't been swallowed up by development. Greg Navarro, CGTN, Trinity Beach.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, we'll be in Qatar as excitement builds before the World Cup semi-final between defending champions France and history makers Morocco.
The story of the North Atlantic convoys and their heroic sailors has become part of British national identity. Less well known is that more than 1 in 7 of the merchant seamen who risked their lives crewing the convoys were Chinese, and that when the war ended, their loyal service was rewarded with betrayal.
If you could meet him now, what would you say to him?
Well, I'd give him a big hug first and say, I'm sorry that this happened to you. We couldn't do anything about it.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Argentina captain Lionel Messi will have one last chance to win the World Cup after his side beat Croatia 3-0 to reach Sunday's final.
Well, these were the incredible scenes in Buenos Aires as fans celebrated. Argentina haven't lifted the World Cup since 1986, and it's the one trophy that has eluded 35-year-old Messi in his illustrious career. He confirms that the final will be the last World Cup game of his career.
Well, let's talk to our correspondent Dan Williams in Doha. Dan, a really special night for Argentina. Is there a sense that this is Messi's year?
Well, yeah, certainly. I mean, one last dance for Lionel Messi at this World Cup, and he has been at times scintillating during this tournament. Certainly, that was the case for that third goal for Argentina, where he mesmerised cutting inside and out, and yeah, really toying with Croatia's defence. It was a real joy to see, and of course all those fans back in Argentina loving every second of that. The stats are really starting to add up for Messi as well. That's 11 World Cup goals he's now chalked up. That's an Argentina record. He's got 5 of those at this tournament alone. That ties him with Kylian Mbappe for the Golden Boot. Of course, Mbappe gets a chance this evening to perhaps go back ahead as France take on Morocco. But that's also a 25th appearance, World Cup appearance. That ties him with Lothar Matthäus on the all-time World Cup appearance record as well. And out of 12 Argentina goals at this tournament, he scored 5, and he's also got 3 assists. So he's just unbelievably important for this Argentina side. And so if this is going to be the last time we see Lionel Messi in an Argentina shirt, well, it's quite a way for him to bow out. But that said, never say never, perhaps, with Lionel Messi.
Never say never. Argentina's opponents in the final, of course, will be decided later when France play Morocco.
That's right, yeah. France, huge favourites for this game, make no doubt about it. They've got an embarrassment of riches up front. We talked about Kylian Mbappe a bunch of times. He's got 5 World Cup goals already. He didn't quite shine against England in the quarter-finals, but they just have so many match winners in this France side, and the likes of Antoine Griezmann, for example, him stepping up, playing a slightly deeper role, and really dictating play against England, by far one of France's most effective players in that game. So they've just got so many potential match winners there, but Morocco won't be overawed by this. They're there, of course, they deserve to be there. They've already chalked up wins against Belgium, against Spain, against Portugal, so they won't be overawed for this one, and they will also be able to count on huge support inside the stadium. About 90% or so of that stadium will all be Moroccan supporters. Now their coach, Walid Regragui, he says that his players, that their fairy tale perhaps won't end just yet.
La meilleure équipe de la compétition qui est déjà sortie, c'est le Brésil.
Not everyone is lucky to play at this stage in the tournament. The best team here, Brazil, has already been knocked out. We're a very ambitious team, very hungry, but I don't know if it will be enough. It can be. We're confident and are determined to rewrite the history books. We want Africa to be on top of the world.
De mettre l'Afrique sur le toit du monde.
Yeah, and in terms of Morocco's support, they will have a huge support inside the stadium. There were a few hundred fans, though, unfortunately, that couldn't get back for that game, but after Air Morocco cancelled some of their flights. But, yeah, no doubt they will definitely have huge support there.
Dan, enjoy the game. Thanks so much for that. Our correspondent Dan Williams in Doha.
The headlines again. At least 4 people have died after a boat carrying migrants sank in the English Channel, hours after the UK tried to reset its policy on crossings.
Our other headlines: UK inflation eases slightly, but experts warn the cost of living crisis is only going to get worse.
And new images of bags of money seized by Belgian police are released as the 3 of the 4 accused appear in court in the EU Parliament corruption investigation.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
More on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps: Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of the team here in London, goodbye.
Goodbye.